Hi, everyone, and welcome to the episode of CineNation. My name is Brandon Sparks.
And I'm Thomas Horton.
And with each month, we're now delving into a specific genre of film, or really storytelling in a way, because we talk about a lot of stuff on here. And for the month of May, we're talking about Texas movies. And if you heard our last podcast, we kind of give you an overview of the Texas genre. And then for this episode and the next episode, we're kind of delving into a specific example of the Texas genre. And so the last episode, we established the tropes and the stories of the Texas genre. And Thomas, what were the tropes we kind of talked about that kind of encompass a Texas movie?
We had kind of being trapped, like this feeling of being trapped and wanting to get out of Texas, of your small town, of your life, that sort of thing. We talked about land, how closely tied people are to the land, to your family land, or to your ranch or whatever, kind of taking pride in owning land. See what else? We talked about heists. We talked about outlaws and outlaws and lawmen.
Family conflict is another thing, which it's not really present in this movie. But the thing about some of these Texas movies I'm finding out, this happened with Bottle Rocket, where it's like they're not really family, but they're kind of these like makeshift families in a way. Mm-hmm. With this movie we're doing today, it has a similar quality. The movie we're doing today is Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show. Currently streaming on Criterion and Crackle if you want to go watch it before you listen to this episode. Can you give us a brief rundown of The Last Picture Show, just the summary of it?
Yeah, so it's based on a novel by Larry McMurtry, who we talked about last week as kind of the MVP of Texas-based storytelling of the 20th century. It's a book. I believe it was published in the early 60s.
I think it's like 60s. I think it's like 60s.
Yeah, 60. Okay, late 60s. And was kind of written off as being kind of smut when it first came out, because it's about it's about a lot of things, but it's a coming of age story and kind of about the sexual awakening of three high school seniors, Sonny, Dwayne, and then JC. And in the beginning of the story, Dwayne and JC are dating, and Sonny is Dwayne's best friend. They kind of like we were talking about adopted family there. They have both kind of emancipated themselves and are living out of a shared room in a boarding house. And they work together. They share a truck. So I mean, they're brothers for all.
Is that in the movie, or is that in the book? They talk
about it very briefly. Someone has a line about I don't like you guys living in that boarding house, but they don't ever really show their
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, okay. But Sonny's dad was the town pharmacist, but got hooked on his own. Was taking drugs and got hooked on them and lost his pharmacy and is broke. And they don't really talk anymore. And so it's about kind of them exploring in their kind of their summer before after high school graduation, them exploring adulthood and their sexuality, and JC, all three of them having these kind of different sexual awakenings that all coincide with each other. But I think more than that, it's a picture of a town at a turning point in the 50s, and it's a very poor small town in Texas, and you're getting on the real boom of oil, kind of what we saw in Giant as well, when oil is really taking over and everyone in town is either rich off of oil or is poor working in the oil fields, basically.
It feels kind of like this specific moment in time. It's the dying of a town. Mm-hmm. Like that's what when watching some of the behind the scenes stuff and hearing people talk about it, it's like it's very much like the death of this small town. And in a way, I think kind of the rebirth with oil coming in. You're on the eve of the Korean War, and you're also weirdly at an eve of when culture is changing in America, but weirdly in these small towns, it's kind of just like somewhat staying the same. Mm-hmm. The big thing, and we'll discuss it, is the movie theater is kind of used as like the changing of the times.
That was, I think, the big scandal when this book came out. It was the 60s, and it was the sexual revolution, and everything had gotten much more liberal. And Larry McMurtry published this book that was like, hey, 10 years ago, everyone was like, oh, in the 50s things weren't like this, everything was pure and we were all innocent. And Larry McMurtry published this book that was like, 10 years ago all the teenagers were driving out and fooling around in their trucks, and I mean, teenagers have always been teenagers, we just didn't know about it as much, and that ruffled a lot of feathers, I think, when the book first came out.
Yeah, a line that I wanted to bring up early, because I think when we discuss this, it'll make sense. I was reading a couple of Roger Ebert has done 2 reviews in this movie, one when it initially came out, and then one for his Great Movies series. And there's a line he says about one in the Great Movies review explaining it. He goes, "It's an evocation of mood. It is about a town with no reason to exist and people with no reason to live there. The only hope is in transgression."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when that line in mind, when you watch this movie, a lot of the characters, except maybe like Sam the Lion, kind of fall into that. And also we talked about kind of the 3 main kind of teen characters, but what's weird is that, or not what's weird, but what they're set against is kind of this ensemble of adult characters that are kind of like future versions of what they could be if they stay in this small town. And those characters are Sam the Lion, who's played by Ben Johnson, and Sam kind of owns the movie theater, the pool hall, and the cafe. Basically the only 3 places in town to go to if you're a teen. And at one point the teens the guys get banned from all these places. It's like, well, what do we do? Mm-hmm. There's nothing to do in this town now. And then you have Ruth Popper, played by Cloris Leachman, who is this early to mid 40s housewife. Her and her husband are in a troubled marriage. What it's kind of alluded to in the movie, I don't know if it's alluded to in the book, is that her husband's gay.
Very heavily alluded to in the book. Yes.
And okay, yeah.
There's a subplot where the coach accuses their English teacher, who's shown very briefly in the movie, of being gay, and he ends up like run out of town. And that's when Ruth finally like stands up for herself, as she like yells at him for ruining that man's life when she knows that he is also gay.
And the other character was Genevieve, who's the cafe waitress, and played by Eileen Brennan, who's again kind of this like, I think there's a scene where she talks about like, I think the person she was with, it's not her I don't know if it's her husband or but basically it's like they were offered the oil rig first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's her husband. Yeah.
And he turned it down because he never took a chance in his life. And then Ellen Burstyn's husband, she plays Lois Farrow, and her husband is now rich in the oil fields or whatever. And so now, because her husband didn't take it, Genevieve's, she's a waitress, and he, I think, has health issues, and she's the one basically taking care of him. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of your main caster. And also Billy, who is played by Timothy Bottom's younger brother, Sam Bottoms. Yeah, the actor Timothy Bottoms plays Sonny Crawford. Jeff Bridges plays Dwayne Jackson. Sybil Shepherd plays J.C. Farrow. So, Thomas, is this in your top 10 favorite films of all time?
For sure, yeah, 100%. I think, and I told my girlfriend watched it for the first time when we were rewatching it this weekend, and I said I can't think of another film that captures like small town life in the way this one does. And so then when we were watching it, and like you were saying, it's very transgressive. She was like, "Is that what small town life was like?" And I was like, "No, not that specifically, but like just the general feeling of it, and of growing up inside it, and being, almost every young person that grows up in a small town wants to get out, but you're surrounded by adults who did not, or have chosen to stay, and so there's always this just kind of bumping of people, and everyone's got different points of view about the town in itself, and all of that is I think is done so wonderfully here. And I think just because the Bogdanovich allows the movie to just kind of sit, like you're in this town, you're not driving towards anything plot wise, you're just sitting in this town and experiencing it with everyone else. And I think it's the only film that or the best film at capturing that of any movie that has tried to capture like small town.
Yeah, I agree. It's just you kind of get to see all the variations of characters that are there. Like it's like you have Ellen Burstyn's character, who is someone who wishes she got out and regrets that she stayed in this town for so long. And weirdly, what I thought interesting in the first scene is that the roles are kind of reversed, is that she wants her daughter JC to get out of town, explore the world, do something else. And JC's like, no, I just want to stay here, go to the college nearby and get married. And she's like, no, what are you doing? Do not stay here. And it's weird because usually it's the parent who's saying, oh, stay here and have a good life. And the kid's like, no, let me get out of this town. I want to escape it. And it's the opposite.
I love Lois is my favorite character in the book and in the movie as well. And I think Ellen Burstyn plays it wonderfully. But yeah, you have this initial scene where Lois, who has always regretted not getting out and can see beyond. You can split the characters up in this movie by who can see like beyond the town and who can't see past the town limits. And there's very few people who can see beyond the town and beyond the drama. And she's one of them. And you have this scene early on where JC is very much about the town. She's the homecoming queen. She's dating the quarterback and she just wants to get married and stay in town. And Lois has this scene where she's just goes in and she's like, you need to have some adventure. You need to get out of here and do something for yourself. And for the rest of the movie, you kind of see Lois realize that she's almost like created a monster. I don't want to go that far and call JC a monster, but like JC takes it way too far, and you can see Lois regretting it through the whole movie. And I think Ellen Burstyn does that so well in that, it is ultimately what she wanted for her daughter, but not in the way that it ends up working out.
Quick history of the film before we dive into it and start dissecting some of the scenes that we want to talk about. As we said, it was directed by Peter Bogdanovich. It's a funny little story of how the movie came to him. He was in a drugstore looking for like toothpaste or something and found a paperback that said The Last Picture Show. He goes, oh, I kind of like that title. Like, that sounds like a movie I could make. And he's like, then I read the back and it said Teenagers in Texas. And I was like, I don't know anything about that. I don't care about that, and put it back. And he said weeks go by and Sal Mineo from Rebel Without a Cause, and also in Giant, who's I think the soldier in Giant that passes away at one point, gets killed in the war. He comes to Bogdanovich, who's like, hey, I've always wanted to be in this movie, but I'm too old now. You should read it and like make it into a movie. And he's just like, okay, this is like the second time it's popped up. He's like, so I put it aside and I didn't care about it. He's like, then a few months go by and a producer comes to me and is like, hey, you should read this book. You should make it into a movie. And he says, he gives it to his wife at the time, Polly Platt. He's like, read it and tell me if it's good and whatever. Like, I don't care. And she reads it and she's like, it's a good book, but I don't know how you can make it into a movie. And he's like, that's why I want to make it.
Well, and you can see watching his first, because this was his second feature, watching his first, you can see where people would get that idea, because his first is about kind of the ending of an era, and it's wrapped up in film. It's called Targets. It's about a character played by Boris Karloff and very closely based. I mean, he's basically playing himself. I'm kind of surprised they changed the name. But he's this horror icon, and he's decided to retire, and he's going to make his last public appearance at a drive-in movie theater. And at the same time, a kind of deranged young man has gone on a killing spree, and the two intersect as this man brings a sniper rifle to the drive-in and starts killing people. And so you almost literally have the death of kind of old Hollywood and as the 60s take over. And so you can see why people would watch that and see this big ending at a drive-in and the loss of innocence and all that sort of thing, and read this book and go, oh, maybe this is Peter Bogdanovich's next thing. It's not they're not similar movies at all, but you can see these little kind of details that would make people go, oh, he could do this.
There's some cultural shifts in it that make it like, oh, this could be an interesting Bogdanovich movie. So before that, there's a company called BBS Pictures or BBS Productions that did 5 Easy Pieces with Jack Nicholson in 1969. And he had went to them with like a genre piece of like, oh, I want to make this next. And they go, no, we don't want a genre piece. Go find something personal. And then he came back with Last Picture Show. And as he was prepping for it, the big thing about this movie, and it's very unconventional, especially for the time in New Hollywood, is it's shot in black and white. And at that point, black and white film in 1971 was considered very unconventional, very uncommercial, and who would want to make it? And so Bogdanovich is like, he calls up Orson Welles, who's his good buddy, and he's like, hey, I really want to get the depth of field that you had as Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil. How'd you do it? He goes, well, you'll never get that in color film. He's like, you should just shoot it in black and white. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, they're never going to let me. He goes, well, have you asked? And he goes, no, he goes, you need to do it in black and white. He goes, the movie that you sent me, even though it's a dirty movie, is what Orson Welles said. He's like, it's an actor's movie. And he said Orson Welles always believed that an actor's movie needs to be in black and white, because in black and white, you see the performances as best they could be. He's like, you're not distracted by the color of their hair or their blue eyes or their costume. You're just focused on the actual performance, which makes sense because in this movie, especially with the adult characters, they all have these wonderful, like juicy, like at least one scene where they're going to give a speech. And it's going to sum up kind of like the history of this town, the history of these characters in some way. And so Bogdanovich asked them, and they're like, okay, we'll let you shoot it in black and white is the big thing. And I think that's what gives this movie this timeless feel, that it feels like it could be from the 1950s, but also feels like it's from the 1970s. But even some stuff feels so modern that could have been like done today. Like some of the shots and cinematography they do.
Well, and that's what I think is so important about the book. Like I said, is it's looking back on a time that's always presented to us as very innocent. And it's looking back at it from a point of view where we know that that's not true. And I think that Bogdanovich shoots that exactly in the right way too, where it feels like we're there in that period, but we're seeing how life really was, and not that like golden hue that's put on it by the people who lived it. We're getting kind of the ugly truth of it.
Yeah, Roger Ebert said it was the best film of 1951. Bogdanovich was trying to get the big thing we talked about with a lot of these actors, with Jeff Bridges and Sybil Shepherd and Timothy Bottoms, is that a lot of these actors like were kind of all new actors. They're all fresh faces. Mm-hmm. And Bogdanovich had to kind of get these kind of older kind of character actors as a way to kind of fill out the rest of the cast. And the big one was Ben Johnson, who plays Sam the Lion, the kind of the old guard of the West who owns the last three places that the teens will hang out at. And Bogdanovich really wanted to get Ben Johnson, called him up, and Ben Johnson's like, no, I can't do it. There's too many words in this movie. I have too many words. Can't do it. And so Bogdanovich calls up John Ford, and Ben Johnson worked a lot with John Ford and was basically John Wayne's sidekick. And Bogdanovich calls Ford and he's like, hey, I have this great movie, this great part for Ben, but he won't do it. He says there's too many words. And John Ford's like, that's what he always says. he goes, he would come on set if She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, ask the scriptie how many lines I got today, and they go, or do I have lines today? And they go, yes. He goes, he would sulk. He was like, he just wanted to get on his horse and ride a horse, and that's all he wanted to do. And Ford's like, give me his number, I'll call him. And he calls him. Ford calls him back 15 minutes later. He'll do the picture. Bogdanovich says that I get a phone call after that 10 minutes later from Ben Johnson. He goes, so you called the old man. And he's like, I'm still not doing it. And they finally fight, and they meet up in LA, and Bogdanovich is there. They're arguing. Bogdanovich's like, look, Ben, if you take this role, Oscar. And he goes, why did you say that? Why did you say that? Fine, I'll do the damn thing. And Bogdanovich is always like, I don't know if he was going to win the Oscar. I just wanted to say it. And he says this a lot with Ben Johnson when Ben Johnson's getting cast, and he says it with Cloris Leachman. He always said these two characters they're playing were the Oscar-winning parts. I feel like so many directors probably say it to their actors and nothing happens, but for this one occasion, he was right.
Yep.
So on to the movie. What are some of your favorite scenes in The Last Picture Show?
Well, I mean, I think you were talking about kind of the big monologues that some people are getting, and I've already said that Lois is my favorite character. My favorite scene in the movie is Ellen Burstyn's kind of big monologue, where you've been seeing her kind of the way the rest of the town sees her. She's a flirt,
yeah, and
she's everyone knows that she cheats on her husband. And she's JC's mom, and she's kind of intimidating. She puts off this like coolness. And in this scene you're going into, it's after Sam the Lion has died, and Sonny knows that Sam had dated this one girl at one point, and Sam talks about how adventurous she was and how fun she was and how deeply in love they were, and has kind of built this woman up as like a legend almost to Sonny. And there's this moment when Sonny's riding in the car with Lois, and you can tell that he's intimidated by her, like most of the town is. And then he realizes she's talking about Sam, and she starts tearing up, and he realizes that she was that girl that Sam was in love with. And she tells this story about what it was like to be, she was like 20 and she had just gotten married, but she and her husband weren't in love, and she and Sam had this affair, and it's incredible. And you know, her character, like we were saying, there's so many people who can't see outside of this town, and Lois is one person who can, but knows that was her like last moment to be like bigger than the town. And it's gone, and now Sam's dead too, and it's incredible. She is so good. Honestly, I love Cloris Leachman in this, but they went up against each other in Best Supporting Actress that year. I would have given it to Ellen Burstyn for that scene. She's fantastic.
Oh man, that's that. Yeah, it's. I mean, both. I mean, I'll talk about Cloris Leachman's scene too, because I think when you look at Ellen Burstyn, Cloris Leachman, and Ben Johnson, they all have one scene where you're like, oh, that one's in the Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're all phenomenal. I think Bogdanovich kind of argued that with Cloris Leachman, it's the last scene you see in the movie.
Yeah.
And it makes sense of like, that's the last thing you're going out on, that you would remember that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember when I first watched this movie, it always felt a little shocking. It was a surprising scene when Ellen Burstyn takes Sonny and drops him off, and they have that kind of heart to heart. And that's, like you said, that's when you realize like, oh, there's more to this person than we know. And it's kind of the idea that weirdly all these characters at one point were essentially in the same shoes as our main three characters. Is that Lois was basically a young JC at some point in her life, where she's in this small town and confides in an older man and falls in love with them. And it's a scene where it feels so different than the rest of her character in the movie, but it's a great transition that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see it happening. It's you know, there's this, like I said, there's kind of this journey. I love. There's another scene where JC has just gone off with the same man that Lois is having an affair with her husband. With and it's a really great scene in that Ellen she's sitting at home and she hears his car roll up. The character's name is Abilene. She has this moment where Abilene has they talk about it a lot in the book, that Abilene has like a very loud car. Everyone in town knows it. And there's a scene when Lois is sitting at home watching television, and she hears Abilene's car come in the driveway, and she says, oh, he's here for me, and runs to the door, and she sees JC coming in. And I was reading I think it was the oral history when they were talking with her, and she said, I took this scene to Peter, and I said, I have 8 different emotions here when I see JC come in. I'm like mad at her, and then I feel sorry for her, and then I feel guilty for what I've pushed her to become. And how do I do? I don't say anything. How am I going to get that across? And she said that he told her it was better that she didn't have any lines, because I was going to give her the opportunity to do all of that. And
he said, don't worry about all that. Throw everything out. Think the thoughts of the character, and the camera will pick it up.
Yeah. And
because
you do.
She's like,
you see it.
You do.
I think that's the big moment before and because she doesn't say anything, it's a little more subtle. But before you get that big speech about Sam, there's 2 others. There's a scene when she's crying at Sam's funeral, and then that scene where you start to see kind of her facade crack, and this ice queen role that she's built up for herself inside the town is starting to fall.
Yeah. Because her intro is just so like, oh, she's the villain of this movie in a way. It's like she comes up, it's like a close up of the car pulling up. She has sunglasses on and is like peering at JC and Dwayne and Sonny in the car. It's like, we're having dinner in 15 minutes. You better be there. And you're like, oh, this mother's like, she's a piece of work. And you see her like openly flirting with men that have girlfriends or have wives, like the Christmas party or whatever. And so yeah, it's a phenomenal arc of a character for her. Sam the Lion's speech is kind of the big one.
Yeah, Ben Johnson's fantastic in this.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of done in one take, and it's his monologue is essentially the death of the Old West. Like, his character itself is the old guard of you could say the old Western movies before New Hollywood comes in. It's the changing of the times when the 50s are coming in and hitting these small towns. Like, he is a man who he talks about, he's like, I used to own this land, and when they're at the pond or the tank, where he's like, I just like coming out here because there's turtles, there's no fish. I just like to enjoy this moment. And he's using his character as the death of the Old West, and his monologue is kind of the death of the beauty of the Old West. And this is his kind of last big moment before he ends up dying in the movie. Mm-hmm. Spoilers, by the way, if you haven't seen the Last Picture Show, I just want you to know that. And it's a wonderful moment where I think even Bogdanovich said it was an overcast day, and he's like, if I had control of the clouds, it would have happened this exact same way. Like, the clouds come in at one point or come out at one point, and the sun shines on Ben Johnson. It's just a very kind of beautiful moment, and it's probably the first like big heavy speech in the movie. If I remember correctly, like, I don't think anyone else. I don't think Burson's speeches are later. Gloria Leachman's speeches are later. Eileen Bryn's speeches are later. He's kind of the first one, and so that's maybe when you kind of start opening up and seeing that the adults in this town are trapped, and they're once younger people who had dreams and had hopes, and are slowly dying in a way. It's a dark moment. I apologize. So that's one. And the ending scene with Gloria Leachman is a big favorite of mine too. And to set up kind of the plot line of this is that Sonny Crawford, basically the main character in the movie, the main kid, and he ends up having an affair with an older woman played by Gloria Leachman, who's Ruth Popper, and her husband's closet homosexual, and you never see him at the house, and so Gloria Leachman turns into this kind of like old, plain, kind of old maid when you first see her. And then as her relationship progresses with Sonny, she like becomes like a teenager again. Mm. She puts her hair down finally when they start seeing each other. She's happier. And then he disappears because because JC kind of snatches her hooks into him, and he stops talking to her. And then at the end of the film, after a tragic events happen, he shows back up to her house after like not seeing her for months, and she just has like, honestly to me, one of the best like all-time closing speeches of a movie. Mm-hmm. At first, kind of like, oh, you're back, let's have some coffee, and then she's like, no, I have been apologizing to you in my head for months. I'm not doing this again. I'm not gonna like sit back and watch and like be pushed over. This is how I feel about you, you horrible child.
Mm-hmm. And then she sees something in that scene, and I think there's this kind of overwhelming theme in this movie of like it's like the big sad. Like, everyone in this town has just a big sadness over them, and I think she sees it in him in that moment. There's a turn in that speech where she looks at him and she really like registers what's on his face, and she does feel sorry for him. And I think she's realized that he is now like, the town has him now almost. I mean, you've just watched him lose his best friend. He loses the picture show, which is like the fun, all the fun that's left in this town. And then he loses, I don't think we have to say spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie, you need to go see the spoiler. But he loses Billy, who is literal innocence. Billy is played in the movie by Timothy Bottom's younger brother, but is not actually his brother in the movie. But it's an orphaned boy who is mute, who Sam was raising. No one took him in the town. They talk about in the book that his family had moved away and just left him, and Sam takes him in, and and he is kind of like Sonny's younger brother. Sonny, Dwayne, and Billy are all these almost orphans that Sam is a father figure to all of them. And Billy and Sonny are really close, and there's this. I also wanted to bring this up because I don't want to call it like my favorite scene, but it is a scene that like it gets me, it chokes me up every time. But when Billy is hit by a truck, and you see, I think the reason it gets to me so much is there's this kind of small town thing where like men aren't emotional, and through the whole movie you see Sonny go through so much, and he just kind of takes it all blank faced. And there's this scene when Billy is killed, all these men are gathered around him, and they're just kind of talking like, well, I wonder what he was doing out in the road. I don't know, man. He was never very smart. And one of them's like, let's go back in the diner and finish our coffee. And Sonny just that gets him, and he just like erupts. Yeah. And yells at all of them. And I think that it's such a, and then that is when he goes to see Ruth afterwards. And
first he decides he tries to leave town. He drives out of town and then stops and turns back around.
He can't do it. He can't leave. But and I think that's the moment he explodes, and he's like, I'm done with this. I can't do whatever this is in this town. And he gets to the edge, and he has to turn back, and that's he resigns himself to live with that kind of whatever this sadness is that's over this town instead of getting out.
And it's funny because it goes with what you brought up last episode of like 8 hours one way. Like you can't get to anything. It's 8 hours away. Basically, you're in the middle of like Texas, and maybe in that drive, it's just kind of like, wait, what am I doing? What is my plan here? Like, where am I going? I'm just driving and I have no place to go. Let me just go back there and deal with this. And that's when he goes to Ruth. And it's almost like the error of his ways of like, I realized I messed up. Or it's even there's a great scene too in that moment. It's before Billy dies, when he goes back to his old high school for the football game, and he's talking to this guy. He goes, oh yeah, this new quarterback, like back in your day, you guys couldn't tackle or catch. He goes, when did you graduate again? He's like, last year. Wow, feels so long ago. It's just like in this town, like time can stand still but also go by fast, where you like, wow, 20 years ago, I was in high school, and I'm now just working at the convenience store, and nothing's changed. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's so many moments in this film that capture that feeling of these characters that are just frozen in time, but it's like everything around this town is moving fast, and they're just stuck there. You're seeing all these characters grow up. JC's now left town. Dwayne's going off to the war, and Sonny's the one who's stuck here.
Yeah, and he doesn't even have Billy anymore.
Yeah, it's like all my friends are gone. Everyone I can confide in is gone. So I think that's why too he goes to Gloria Leachman and be like, this is the only person in the world that understands me.
Yeah, and I think he suddenly kind of understands her, because in the book, and you kind of see it a little bit in the movie, he's kind of unnerved by how emotional she is sometimes. Yeah, it makes him uncomfortable, and they talk about it a good bit in the book too. Is like sometimes she'll just start crying, like they'll just be together, like laying out on the floor talking about stuff, and she'll just start crying out of happiness, and it does. He always gets uncomfortable when that happens, and I think, like we said, that whatever happens with Billy finally like taps into something within him, and he's got all of that emotion, and I think that is also why he goes back to her, is he finally understands, the emotion that she's been showing. He's finally feeling the way that she did, and that was part of the reason why he kind of avoided her, was she was always kind of sad or melancholy, and he never understood it.
She's the ghost of Christmas future in a way. Like, she's the one he's like, oh, this is who I could become, where I'm stuck at home with nothing to do in a low rent job or whatever. And kind of, and we haven't mentioned much of it, but in the sequel, that's kind of what he's become. Sonny in the movie Texasville, Sonny's kind of become just like, he's now the mayor of the town or whatever, but doesn't really have any like job to do as the mayor. He's just kind of like a figurehead that's there and living in the old past. Another favorite scene of mine that I wanted to bring up is the final like movie theater scene.
Mm-hmm.
That him and Dwayne are. It's Dwayne's last night in town before he gets shipped off to the Korean War, and it's and when Sam died, he left the movie theater to the woman who ran the popcorn stand.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the movie, when you first see it, the movie theater's kind of I won't say packed, but it's like a hangout for teenagers and all these people, and it's they're showing like Father of the Bride. And then by the end of the movie, it's just like, oh, it's the last night because she couldn't keep it open after Sam died. And they're watching Red River, which is a big connection with kind of Bogdanovich in this movie. And it's like, there's no one there. It's like, it's pretty much just Dwayne, Sonny, and like 5 other people for the last night of this apparent like big, huge hangout spot for this town, but no one cares. No one's there. And it's the rise of television at this point, and so these like little bitty movie theaters in small towns like this are dying off because everyone's at home watching TV. When you watch the movie, when they're in like a anytime you're in the home, you hear like a TV going on in the background most of the time. It's like people are staying in more, no one's going out. So these little businesses like a movie theater in this town that really just they need a specific number of people to survive, that they just close. And it just stays that way as the sequel kind of shows, like that it becomes a caved in business that just everything's built up around it and no one cares.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a great little moment when they're watching Red River, which is this movie of like, I feel like almost Manifest Destiny type stuff where it's like it's Dwayne and Cliff. We talked about this in the show. Wayne and Cliff are like doing the first cattle drive, and it's innovation, it's expansion.
Yeah, and it's literally it opens with them just John Wayne just going like, "This is my land. I claim this." Like it's very Texas in that way.
Yeah, that movie. Yeah, and then it ends. I think the scene that they show is like, all right, take them to Abilene. Like it's them going off and leading this like big, huge adventure. And Sonny's just like trapped in town, mm-hmm. and everyone's leaving. And this is the last movie. The last movie he'll get to see on a screen in this town, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing, is that like picture in a time right now where we don't have movie theaters. If you're a huge movie buff, if you live in a city where like, okay, we're closing the movie theater, there's no way you can see a movie again in this town without driving 3 hours a certain way or whatever. And that's part of his, again, this kind of loss of innocence. That's part of his like upbringing, his childhood, the place he goes to hang out or to go hang out and make out. And now it's gone. Yeah, those are my favorite scenes. Do you have any more you want to talk about real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I just there's not like one scene in particular that sticks out to me for like JC's arc, but I do think like Sybil Shepherd is incredible in this, and it's a really interesting approach. It would be, I think the first time I watched this movie, I thought that JC was the villain of this movie.
I kind of thought the same way.
But when you go back and watch it, it's she's this her mother, and that's kind of what I love about Lois too. Is Lois does set her up poorly. Like Lois puts her on the wrong path.
Well, she's like, you should just have sex with a guy so you find out that like he's not worth it.
Yeah, and but what JC takes at it as is that like it becomes where like sex is all she's worth, and that sex is how she manipulates. Yeah. Sex is how she manipulates everyone around her, and it's how she values herself, and just like being scandalous and being the talk of the town is the only thing that gives her excitement. And it's a really fascinating arc to see, because you do kind of forget, like I was saying, when you go back and watch it. I think you said you were surprised to go back and watch that original scene and remember how innocent she is at the beginning of the movie. It's you remember so much about where she ends up in this movie that you forget how she kind of starts the movie as a very young, impressionable young girl. And and you see her use people, and you see people use her. And the more and more I come back to this movie, the more I think like her arc and like I said before, kind of the arc of her mother is just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And she does have this big scene when she goes off with Abilene, and she comes home, and you're not really sure how she's feeling. And then she just, like, she sees her mom and she just breaks down into tears, and you realize that maybe she's realizing she's gone a little too far.
Yeah, because she's built up this idea of sex, and, like, I guess also losing her virginity as being this kind of glorious thing in a way, because she's been she tried it beforehand with Dwayne, but Dwayne couldn't do it, and so she's like, you better tell everyone we did it. And so when this guy comes up with Abilene and they go to the pool hall and have sex, she's building it up as this great thing, when this dude's just saying, oh, this is someone I can have sex with real quick. And that's the thing, is that when he takes her home and she's kind of wanting to have a moment with him in the car, he's just like, can you get out? Everything's starting to crash down around her in that moment.
Well, and so much of what she does in this movie is motivated by wanting to just to go steady with this guy Bobby, the rich guy from the next town over, and he tells her, I don't date virgins, come back when you're not a virgin. And she spends almost the entire movie kind of trying to make herself appealing to him, and then just finds out I don't think they address it in the movie. They just kind of, you see her and she says that she found out he got married. In the book, she just finds out in the announcements section of the newspaper that he married someone else. And that's when she goes off with Abilene, is that night afterwards. But she spent so much of her time trying to, like, win Bobby over, and then he just, goes off and marries someone and doesn't even tell her.
Yeah, and then it becomes like, again, her mother mentions Sonny, and how, like, oh, Sonny's been sleeping with Ruth Popper in town. She's like, well, she's in her 40s. She's like, yeah, everyone knows about this. Like, everyone in town knows that Sonny is, like, having an affair with this 40-year-old. Again, this kind of small town vibe, but no one's talking about it. And she's like, oh, let me try to get him instead. And yeah, the way Bogdanovich and also DP Robert Surtees shoot Sybil Shepherd, like the POV shots of her, where it's like usually from, like, Sonny's perspective, like, it's like beautiful. I could see why Sonny becomes so not obsessed, but becomes so infatuated with JC, and why everyone in town does. Like, why every like, basically it's like she's the one girl that every guy in town wants to be with. I can understand that. And this small town, she's just kind of this gorgeous beauty that should not be here. That's the so surprising thing at the beginning, where she's just like, oh no, I want to stay here.
Yeah, because all the rich kids in town go to hang out in Wichita Falls, which is the next town over. That's what you kind of see with Randy Quaid's character, Lester. Is he lives in town with them, but he very rarely, like, spends weekends there or anything. He goes to Wichita Falls to hang out with the country club crowd.
And they go skinny dipping in a pool, not a pond, a pool. Difference. That's the rich part.
Yeah.
Like that, and that's also, and that, just talking about that real quick, because that hits me, because there is this, like, these young teens, or, like, it's this changing of the times where you go swim in a pool indoors. When Sam is talking about his time with Lois, it's them skinny dipping in a pond with turtles or whatever. It's like you're seeing this society changing toward this more structured, like, less nature based, and more this, like, business type.
Yeah, but also, like, it's always happened. I think that's what McMurtry kind of sets out to prove in this book, is, like, people have always been this way, we just didn't talk about it. The movie is about both, like, the loss of innocence within these young people and within this town, like losing the picture show, but it's also about kind of smashing that fake innocence that's been built up around that time. It's about establishing both.
Yeah. Onward to on-set life real quick. Brief side section of what was it like when they were shooting in Texas at the time. They had 1 week of rehearsals in LA, 1 week in Texas, which is something that's very unheard of nowadays for a film, to have rehearsals of any kind. A lot of people were seeing each other. So Sybil Shepherd and Jeff Bridges, they were dating during the time of filming. Bridges was in the Coast Guard, got sent away to do, like, his military service for a week, comes back, and Pierre Bogdanovich is dating Sybil Shepherd. And Bogdanovich was married at the time to his production designer, Polly Platt, and Shepherd and Bogdanovich started having an affair. Platt moved out of, like, their hotel room, but still worked on the movie. Last thing, Frank Marshall, who was Steven Spielberg's producer and husband to Kathleen Kennedy, plays the quarterback at the end of the movie that runs out when Sonny's there, and Marshall was an assistant production manager and helped do location scouting with Polly Platt because he had worked on targets with Bogdanovich before.
One other little trivia I noticed.
Yeah.
Was after reading that Salmoneo was the one that Bogdanovich credited for giving him the book at first. He gets special thanks in the credits for this movie and in the credits for Texasville.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The film was nominated for 8 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay for Pierre Bogdanovich and Larry McMurtry, Best Supporting Actor for Ben Johnson and Jeff Bridges, Best Supporting Actress for Ellen Burstyn and Gloria Leachman, and then Best Cinematography for Robert Surtees, who actually had 2 nominations in the same year that year for this and Summer of 42. Surtees shot The Graduate, also shot a lot of Vincent Minnelli movies like Bad and the Beautiful and Father of the Bride. He didn't shoot Father of the Bride, but that's a Vincent Minnelli movie, so it feels like kind of a connection there. So Thomas, what are your thoughts on the Oscars from that year?
Oh man, French Connection is fine. So French Connection swept the Oscars that year.
The only Oscars they won was for Ben Johnson and Gloria Leachman.
Yeah, Best Picture show won 2 Oscars out of the 8 it was nominated. But I think I obviously am biased towards this film, but also to think that Clockwork Orange was in the running.
Yeah,
you've got Clockwork Orange and Last Picture Show going up for Best Picture. You've got this going up for Best Screenplay. You've got this going up for Best Director. And to give almost all of it to French Connection, which is fine. It's a good cop movie, but it's not I don't know. Can a good cop movie beat out a really honest drama? I don't think so. I've never understood the French Connection hype. I saw the French Connection when I was fairly young, and then read that it was this hugely well respected awarded film, and went back to rewatch it because I was like, really, that cop movie? And then I went back to rewatch it and I was like, what are we talking about here, guys? I really don't understand what's going on here.
Well, I like French Connection because I love Gene Hackman, but
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it feels like something that should have aged, I don't know, in the way that I mean, it's something like it's in the same lines as something I don't even know what would you put I mean, it's something like Rocky, or where you're yeah, that was really well done. It won a couple of awards. I love that movie, thinking of it warmly, but I don't think it should be the most critically praised film of that year. It doesn't hit that mark for me.
I mean, just to bring up Rocky real quick, it won 1976. Rocky won against All the President's Men, Bound for Glory, Network, and Taxi Driver.
Yeah, I love Rocky. I love Rocky. It is not better than those movies. I'm sorry. And the same with French Connection. French Connection is a fun movie. It is top tier cop movie. Yeah. But I don't think top tier cop movie is ever in the running for best film of the year. I'm sorry. That's just not. I'm not genre biased here. I'm just
you're I don't like cop movies, buddy cop movies that are not funny.
I love cop movies. I love it, and this is a great film, but it's not. It's never going to be the movie of 1972 for me. And I mean, and Bogdanovich has said oh, isn't it that thing that the best film never wins? And I think we've discussed that many times. But
yeah. So basically, I read Bogdanovich says he thinks he lost the Oscar because when people asked him what the best film of the year was, he always said his. Friedkin, the director of French Connection, would always say The Last Picture Show. He said that's why I think Friedkin won the Oscar. Because he's I told him the truth. I told him how I felt. I didn't play the political game. I was I think my film's the best movie of the year, and they're oh, we don't like that.
And it makes it harder to know. There's so many movies that are respected now that get this Citizen Kane treatment, where it's they were not respected at the time, and it's harder to know that this was immediately respected, and still looked over for Best Picture. That's
a shame.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about. I'll ask him real quick just because it's kind of the format. What worked? Is there anything else that worked in this movie that we did not discuss?
I think, and I've noted, it's funny. I went back and I've watched 4 Bogdanovich movies this week just to kind of hype myself up for this. He does not use score, and it's not something that anyone ever talks about really, but he does not use score.
I texted you about it. I was like, man, there's so many Hank Williams songs in this movie.
Yeah, he did the same thing with Targets. He did the same thing with Paper Moon. He did the same thing with Texasville. It's scored completely with what's playing, and it's not like a jukebox. Source. It's not like a jukebox score, like something that like James Gunn does.
Yeah, it's all source music. It's all like coming from the radio or something.
And it's never really like, no one ever says like, "Oh, turn it up. I love this song." Like it's just kind of woven in like score, because no one ever kind of addresses what they're listening to. They're just always listening to it, and yeah, it's almost played like a joke in this movie. Like everyone's just always listening to everyone's always listening to Hank Williams, and usually it's like the same like 2 songs. It's either Hey Good Looking or Blue Yodel.
There's like Why Don't You Live Me Like You Used to Do. I was like, man, they just went because there's like an album of like 40 greatest hits from Hank Williams, and it feels like they played every single one at some point in this movie. But
it gets you into that like monotony of this town. Yeah, like everyone's just listening to the same song everywhere you go.
Like it was weirdly a break when I heard a song that wasn't Hank Williams. I'm like, oh man, Hank Williams isn't good this week right now. Like it was just like another Hank Williams #1 hit.
Yeah,
Jambalaya.
Yeah, but I think it really works, and it kind of gets you into it. It really does put you just smack dab in that town. You don't realize how much you miss score until you're just there in that town, and all you can hear is Hank Williams over and over again, and you want to get out, like you're stuck there with him.
It's that's like a new Hollywood trope in a weird way, because he does it, Scorsese does it. He does it more, I think, not as source, but he'll use when Main Streets, it feels mostly like source music.
Yeah, but even in Mean Streets, like even when it's source, he's still
it's very cinematic,
acknowledging it. Like obviously the jumping jack flash sequence when Robert De Niro first enters. The lights dim, all the sound drops out, and that song comes up, and it goes from. It does have a source, but it becomes score.
Yeah. Yeah,
and he never even uses this as score. It's just always there.
It's more in line a little bit with American Graffiti, but it feels very much just like New Hollywood time, where they're using source music as a way to tell the story and not use score. Anything else what worked that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, it's something I love, and it's a very fine line to tread in a movie like this, where you're just like jumping time and you're getting like snapshots, and it does
it really well. Yeah.
It does it really well, and something I love is every once in a while you've got to throw in some stuff that doesn't like move the plot forward, and it's just like you'd call it in journalism, you call it like a local color. It's just. And one of the things I love, and it's not necessarily like one of my favorite scenes, but I just love that they do it. Is this extended sequence where the preacher's kid like kidnaps a little girl, and the whole town goes nuts over it. That has nothing to do with Sonny's storyline or JC's storyline or Dwayne's storyline, but it makes so much sense. I mean, this is something that. One, it's another example of like the loss of innocence of this town. Like this town cannot pretend to be pure and clean anymore, and 2, it's something that everyone in the town would be talking about, and the way they play it feels so real to I mean, everyone's got something scandalous from their town that happened, and
they all chase after him. Everyone gets in cars.
Yeah, they come and tell the sheriff. I love that the sheriff's at the pool hall, and they come and say he just I forget what that character, Joe Bob or something like that. He's got a double name, but they say, he just kidnapped so-and-so's 5-year-old daughter, and the sheriff goes, he's probably just giving her a ride, and they say no, and he goes, well, let's go, boys, and everyone in the pool hall goes and jumps in a truck with the sheriff to go catch him.
The part that really hit me in that scene, though, was the mother like, oh my god, you have my daughter. If my husband was here, like, what? Why aren't y'all arresting him? Like, my husband would beat him to death if he didn't like taking our daughter. And then when everyone starts to leave, she just leaves her daughter.
Yeah, the daughter's just walking by herself. The daughter's
just walking by herself, and the 2 men are like taking her like, oh, it's okay. And the daughter's just kind of like, okay, cool. I'm just going to follow you guys because everyone's leaving me. Mm-hmm. It's just a weird, like, it's an interesting dichotomy of like, she's so upset about, you kidnapped my daughter. when in reality, it's almost like she's trying to pretend what a parent should be like in a way, and then doesn't really care about the kid. It's just it was an interesting touch.
And it's just such a good little twist because that character's always in the background, kind of as your comic relief. He's just kind of the weird kid that's like he's a little too pure for everyone. Everyone makes fun of him.
Oh, and the preacher's kid?
The preacher's kid, yeah. And it's just this one more, like, this town is changing forever. Like, this kid that was once just kind of your comic relief is like, oh, this kid's twisted too. Like, everyone in this whole town is twisted and they all try and hide it. Again,
it goes back to that transgression comment by Ebert. It's like, this town shouldn't exist for any reason. Everyone in this town has nothing to do, so they go for transgression. Was there anything that did not work about this movie?
How dare you ask me that? I'll tell you this one thing, and I almost don't want to tell you because I feel like this was your favorite scene that you brought up. There's a couple of sequences, and I didn't notice until watching it in HD. There's a couple of sequences. I wish we had a better print of this movie. I don't know what happened with it, but it's not fantastic.
Is it Sam the Lion scene? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. But kind of there's a couple little editing things you can pick up now that it's in HD. There's a couple of times when they switch to slow-mo to draw a scene out a little bit more, and it's very obvious now that we have like high definition, and you can see the film, you can see the grain slow down. But in the Sam the Lion scene, like Bogdanovich talks about, they shot it in a wonder. There's one part when they cut away to just like a shot of the pond, and it is just not a visually interesting. You can tell that they needed to cut away for some reason, and it's just not a visually interesting shot that they cut to. And I've noticed it the last couple of times because I've also just gone and pulled that scene up every once in a while just because I love that scene so much. And I wish that scene would be like perfection. If they even, I mean, I'm fine with them cutting away, but I just, the shot feels like they were just like, oh, we need some B-roll to fill in here. And it's just not, you can tell the shot was not done with purpose. And it ruins what could be. It doesn't ruin, but it is a very small, it's a very small little scratch on what could be like a perfect scene.
I love that, like, when you're asking what didn't work about this movie, you're like, oh, this cutaway, man.
Yeah. One cutaway in this movie.
This one cutaway didn't work.
No, exactly. That's how I feel about this movie.
Okay. Big question real quick. How does this film fit within the Texas genre?
Oh, I think it's huge. I think this is like you were talking about having Red River playing at the movie theater. These are like sandwiches on like Texas. Like, and I think this goes really well with Giant. I think you're seeing,
it does.
Whereas Giant tries to show you all of it, you're seeing a very specific part of Giant from everyone else's point of view. In Giant, you see the people who are successful, and here you're seeing the people who aren't.
Well, like with a Giant, for example, it's like they're not portrayed as racist in this movie, but in Giant, it's the scene when they all go to the diner and everyone's just hanging out at the diner. They're like, oh, why are you here with this Hispanic woman with you? Mm-hmm. It's like it's that scene from everyone else's perspective is this movie, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's like everyone who lives in the town outside the oil rig, this is their movie.
Yeah,
but Giant's about the rich people.
You have, and I think this is so much about the Texas myth. Like, you know, you're seeing a place where everyone's worth is based on for the entire history of Texas as a state and as a country before that, it's about land ownership. People came out here because it was huge and you could just grab whatever you wanted. And now you're seeing a period where people aren't able to own land,
or even just own a business.
And you're seeing kind of the death of that the old Texas mythology, and even like we were talking about with Sonny finally like embracing his emotions, like you're seeing the death of that, like Texas, you're seeing the death of the cowboy. It's all, this is the turning point, and so you for sure see the longing to get out of Texas. I mean, I think if anything, that's like the underscoring theme of this film is just the longing to get out. So I think it's for sure a Texas movie. I think it's kind of an anti-Texas movie. You know, if there's a genre of Texas movie, this is the antithesis of it. But
it's the dark side.
It's examining all that stuff that we've seen in the Westerns for so long, and showing you what happens when time goes on. So I think it fits in really well with Giant, especially as like a very small snapshot of the turning point within Giant. Like we see this part happen in Giant, and this takes that little period and drops you into the middle of it and makes you just sit in it.
And like I said, you're seeing scenes where like Ben Johnson as Sam the Lion talks about like, oh, I used to own this land, when talking about the pond he was on, and like now I don't own it, but I come out here still to like remember the good old days or whatever of the beauty of this
like,
place.
Like so much in Giant is spent on like your legacy and what Bit can pass down to his kids, and we're seeing two boys who have no legacy, the only legacy they have is what Sam has passed on to them, and that's pretty much gone by the end of the movie.
I was going to ask this later, but I'll ask it now. He gives money to the preacher's kid.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder, is the preacher's kid his kid?
I had always assumed it is that Sam had seen like how much everyone picked on the kid, and Sam's always someone who sees beyond like the status quo, and that was kind of what I always read it as.
I love there's one again that made the sheriff, one of the old guys, like, I don't know why he left that kid some money. Should have left me some of that money. I'm just as good as he is. It's just, I love how you have this like kind of Greek chorus in a way of these kind of characters who are just commenting on weird parts of society that are unaware of what's happening, but it's just like, oh, this has affected my day. Let's discuss it real quick. Like, again, it's like, oh, he's probably just, it's like basically no one wants anything to disrupt their day in this movie. Like these kind of other adult characters like that. It's like the sheriff, like, oh, he's probably just driving her home. Like, I don't want to miss my pool game. Let me do my pool game.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about this town. It's like they're stuck in a loop. And and you're seeing the people that you follow in this movie are the only ones who have really broken out of it.
Let's see. Alternate universe cast. All right. These are some interesting ones. First, Ellen Burstyn was offered all three lead female, like older female roles. She auditioned for Ruth and Genevieve. And then Bogdanovich also had her read for Lois. And Bogdanovich said to her after the audition, hey, you know what? I've never done this. You're great in all three of these. Call me tomorrow and tell me which one you want to play. And he thought she was going to pick Genevieve or Ruth, but she goes with Lois because that was the more interesting character to her. The character of Billy, who's the kind of the mute, the kind of the kid that's mentally challenged, Bogdanovich cast him because the kid they cast wasn't working out for him, is what he said. The rumor is it was Dennis Quaid was the kid who played Billy, and essentially, I guess Bogdanovich fired to cast this other kid. And it's funny because Randy Quaid's also in the movie as the Lester Marlowe, I think's his name.
Yeah.
John Ritter is Sonny, and he was going to cast Tex Ritter, John Ritter's dad, as Sam the Lion.
Oh, okay.
And Tex Ritter's this country music star who was also in like all these old country western movies in the 30s and 40s. Another name I listened to before coming on here, it was never offered to him, but apparently it was discussed. But Bogdanovich said no, he's probably too famous when every other person in this movie is like kind of unknown. Jimmy Stewart for Sam the Lion. He said that they talked about Jimmy Stewart, but it wouldn't work since everyone else was unknown. And you just all of a sudden see Jimmy Stewart pop up on screen.
Yeah. I think it would kind of break up the like ordinariness of this movie, which is exceptional.
So like that's why they never offered it to him. That's the alternate cast of that movie. Other interesting info I have for you. Jeff Bridges, I think, was the first person to read for Dwayne. And Bogdanovich said that Dwayne was such a kind of a mean character, and that when they cast Bridges, he said, oh, Bridges is a nice guy. Maybe they'll add some complexity to the character of Dwayne.
Well, and he does. It's weird. Dwayne is one of the only characters in the book that you never get his point of view. You never follow, like it's told, entirely third person, but you follow specific people and get an insight into their mind, but you never hear from Dwayne.
You never, even in the movie, you never see a scene of Dwayne outside of like JC and Sonny.
Yeah,
like
which is weird that then Dwayne becomes there's 4 more books after this just about Dwayne,
and the biggest star of the entire movie ends up being Jeff Bridges. Let's see what else was there. Oh, the big thing that I want to bring up, and the kind of connection to Red River. They drove all around town, or all around Texas, to find the town, and it ended up being Archer City. They actually shot in Archer City, which is where McMurtry, I think, still lives. He says he says, I've had the same mailbox for 70 years in Archer City. And they changed the name from, it was Thalia. Is that the name of the town?
Thalia.
Thalia, yeah. Thalia in the book. They changed it to Anna Rain for the film because that was a ghost town outside of Archer City that had that same name. Also, Bogdanovich wanted the town to have a similar name to Abilene, which is the town that John Wayne and Montgomery Clift are going to in Red River. Mm-hmm. Is why he wanted to be Anna Rain. He wanted that similarity, which is why I think also too, I don't know if it is, maybe his name's in the book, but Abilene, the character in this movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I only have one story question. Does JC ever love any of these guys for real?
Yeah, I think JC loved Dwayne, which is kind of, I think, what Lois saw as well. Was that JC in the way, you know, within the town, where JC really would have been, if Lois hadn't said anything, JC for at least a little while would have been happy to marry Dwayne and live in Anarene. But then you see that, and that's the thing where I think JC's storyline is the one that's most interesting to keep coming back to, because you keep seeing more and more of her journey, and you start to see her put more and more value into her social standing and into what other people think of her, and that's when she kind of has to she kind of manipulates Dwayne in order to better her own social standing, and that is when she loses sight of any sort of emotion, I think, at that point, when she starts to see sex as like a way to get power and a way to advance herself. I don't think that she really has any emotional connection to the rest of to Bobby or to Sonny afterwards. But I do think there was something there with Dwayne in the beginning for sure, and that's what kind of scared Lois, was seeing her daughter be in love at that age and knowing how, you know, being that young and making that commitment, how it could affect her life
forever.
Yeah.
Any quick comments about Texasville? I guess a brief summary of Texasville. It's the sequel, the book sequel and the movie sequel to Last Picture Show. The movie pretty much has the entire cast back except Ellen Burstyn and anyone that dies, basically. And it's focused on Dwayne as a oil man, but is like an oil man who's like $12 million in debt, at least in the movie.
Yeah, it's set in like 86 when the oil the economy is tanked. Oil prices are down. Yeah.
And Ruth Popper, Cloris Leachman's character, works for Jeff Bridges' character Dwayne. Randy Quaid's a banker who's like losing a bunch of money with Dwayne. Dwayne's having affairs on his wife, and then his older son starts having affairs with those same women, basically. And the big kind of storyline is that JC comes back. JC's is like a successful actress who's like been living in Europe for the past few years, and a tragic event, I think it's her husband and son have died tragically in some on-set event, and she's come back home to Texas, small town Texas, after being gone for so long as this like cultured woman. And she meets back up with Dwayne, not in like a romantic way, but like they just cross paths because Dwayne is now married to Annie Potts, who steals the movie as like, because I think you said before, as we were talking about, is that she doesn't have the limitations of like, oh, she was in Last Picture Show. Like she's the most like fresh character. And then Sonny is now the mayor and is kind of slowly going insane is what it is. But he's having like brain problems where he's like,
yeah, it's some sort of like early onset dementia.
Yeah, like he's thinking he's in the past. And there's a great line that Jeff Bridges says about Sonny. He goes, someone's like, I don't want him to go away. He goes, he's already gone away, honey. He's just gone away to the past. Like he's now just living in his mind. He's going back to the picture show and like pretending he's watching a movie. Or he's going back to the bleacher, the stadium they're at, and pictures the football game or whatever. Like it's just he's still living in this old ways of what was in Last Picture Show, which is what he lost, the childhood and innocence that he lost. He's still searching for. It's okay. It's fine. What were your thoughts? Your brief thoughts on that movie?
No, I mean, I think it's very hard to make a sequel to a masterpiece.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, it's, and I've read the book, and it's difficult to adapt for sure. The first book and the first film are both hyper realistic, and they feel like you're there. And the second book, the rest of the books following Dwayne are a little bit more ridiculous. I would call them like tongue in cheek. They still take place in the real world, but it's kind of this like, how crazy can your midlife crisis get kind of thing, and everything in the book is kind of approached with like a wink and like, ha ha ha, look how crazy Dwayne's life has gotten from being that like simple high school kid that we last saw him. And Bogdanovich kind of plays it with almost the same tone as the first one, and I don't think it translates. The book does not play it with that same tone, and so you lose a lot of the moments that are meant to be a little bit more comedic. You don't really get. It doesn't feel like Bogdanovich, or they're adapting them over from the book, but it doesn't feel like Bogdanovich or Jeff Bridges or anybody is like playing it for that humor all the time. There were some moments, like I had some solid chuckles in the movie.
Yeah,
I love that.
Same.
I love that JC like doesn't remember Dwayne when they first run into each other.
Do I know you?
Yeah,
we used to date.
yeah. It's so funny to think to her it was just like, yeah, it was my high school boyfriend for like for like a year, and for us it was like, yeah, this is this movie we've been watching, I've seen 8 times, and is like regarded as one of the best movies ever. Like that's huge for like JC and Dwayne, and then for her it's just like a year out of her life. I do think it has some interesting stuff to say about like the nature of sequels and coming back to a life, especially a life in a small town where everyone is still there. Like normally you'd watch a sequel and you'd be like, really, like all these people are still around, but yeah, that's a small town. Like they're still gonna see Eileen Brennan's character, who was their like favorite waitress at the diner. She's still going to be around. Like they're still going to interact with her.
Instead of the cafe they were going to, it's now the Dairy Queen spot. They're always hanging out at. Like they eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It feels like at the Dairy Queen.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that's like, yeah, I wouldn't want to. I don't like coming back and seeing, what's come of this movie that I think is so incredible. But I mean, that's also, I guess, a solid metaphor for like middle age and like seeing this town become, even if the town was dreary, it felt unique before, and now it just feels, and this is what happened in the 80s and 90s, it all feels like any mid-level town that built up around an interstate.
Yeah, the comment I wrote in my review was that it feels like, I said the town has been built around the shells of the old businesses from the first film, almost ignoring they even exist. Like a haunted house with new occupants that ignore the ghost around them. Like there are some spots where like you still have the old picture show still there, but it's just caved in. I feel like there's still businesses that are just boarded up that were in the first one. They've just been still boarded up, but they're still celebrating the 100th year of the town. Like they're a bustling town, when in reality they're still just a very similar town to what they were before. Yeah,
and there's just some stuff you just can't get around, especially aesthetically. Like I read a review of someone who really liked this movie who talked about the duality of like the last picture show opens with a shot of the theater, and this opens with a shot of a TV antenna, and it's like,
yeah,
okay, yeah, sure it does, but like a TV antenna is not as visually interesting as an old theater on like a main street. Like that's not going to be.
And TV doesn't have a big connection to these characters in this movie. When that movie theater did, is the thing. Moving on. I don't want to talk much about Texasville. Awards. The Beatrice Straight Award for an actor and actress with limited scenes, but kills it.
Ooh. I mean, how limited are we talking? Like, should I give it to Ellen Burstyn or should I give it to Eileen Brennan?
I would give it to Ben Johnson.
Okay, yeah, you give it to Ben Johnson too.
Because Ben Johnson has like...
All right, well, if you're giving it to Ben Johnson, I'm giving it to Ellen Burstyn.
Well, okay, that's fine. Yeah, because Ben Johnson like is only on screen for like 9 minutes and 54 seconds. That's how long he's on the screen for in this movie, which he feels like he's on there much longer. He only shot for 10 days. I give it Ben Johnson. You're giving it to Ellen Burstyn. Okay. The Joe Pesci X Factor Award.
I think if you're talking X Factor, I think you got to give it to Sybil Shepherd. This was her first on-screen appearance.
Okay.
And she I think she's great. Like, she had never acted. She was a model, and Bogdanovich saw her on a magazine and said, "That's JC."
Yeah.
And I think she's incredible in this. I think this is what the X Factor is for. Like, I wouldn't say she's the best performer in this movie whatsoever, but she's got the X Factor. You're just like, who is that? You can't look away.
I would also throw in Cloris Leachman as well. Why I say Cloris Leachman is because Leachman at that point was like, she was like on mostly TV shows at that point. Like, she wasn't a big film actor,
and she's someone who has been remembered as a comedian for the most part.
Still, yeah, I agree with you.
Despite having won an Academy Award for this,
it's like she had only done like 5 movies before Last Picture Show, but she was known for being like the mother on Lassie, I believe, and she was at this point, I think she was on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The Gene Hackman MVP Award.
I think you gotta give it to Bogdanovich in this, man.
I don't disagree.
Co-writer, director. Sounds like he did I was about to say, sounds like he did a lot of producing work on making this happen.
I agree, especially for your kind of like breakout. It's supposed to be your kind of big, like Targets is a Corman movie, so it's your first feature, but it's not like your first feature. Like, but that's like your college thesis film, and Last Picture Show is your first like directorial debut in a way. Like, this is his first movie. I agree with Bogdanovich. You could argue Larry McMurtry as well if you wanted to, just in terms of the co-writer.
I do have to throw this out there, and I've told you this before. This is, I think, one of the best like book to screen adaptations. Just in soul, when you read the book, when I was reading the book for the first time, I was constantly like looking at where I was at in the book and just going, how did they turn this into a 2-hour movie? Because everything. I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in adapting a book into a film to read this and watch this, because everything that is important made it in, and everything that is left out is either really well covered visually. Like, there's a lot of times when in the book you're getting everyone's thoughts of what's happening, and when you go and when you read that and you go back and watch the movie, it's, you know, several pages congested to a shot in the movie that just sum it up perfectly. And it's real. McMurtry and Bogdanovich both are incredible at picking out like what needs to be in and what can just be alluded to. And it's an incredible adaptation, I think.
Final questions. The big one for you. If this was remade today, who do you cast? I will say mainly focus on the adult role, so I feel like you can try for the teens, but because if you want to cast unknowns, the only teen that popped out to me, and we mentioned her a few times ago, I kind of would be interested to see, she might be a little too old now, Florence Pugh as JC.
Yeah.
That's the one that popped out to me.
Yeah, I definitely think she could do well with that.
I don't know the other teen roles, but Sam the Lion, who do you...
Oh man, I didn't think you were gonna make me. Usually, I try and prepare for these. I didn't think you were gonna.
Oh no, this is
recast this movie.
Like, would you? Here, I was gonna throw this one out there just for fun. Do you do Jeff Bridges?
Honestly, I think that might be a little too like tongue in cheek, but I think he'd be great. I think he would be great at this now.
Okay.
I was kind of thinking Tommy Lee Jones, which they've both played like Texas cops.
Yeah, I like that
stuff now, but oh man, you got to have that like ruggedness. I think you do need to have the Jeff Bridges might be a little too meta, but you do need that like meta. It needs to be a cowboy. I mean, that's what they did with Ben Johnson.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Maybe Robert Duvall.
Yeah, Duvall. Yeah.
A little too old at this point.
Maybe. Yeah, but that's not a bad choice. Man, if Sam Shepard was still alive.
Yeah, Sam Shepard would be perfect.
Sam Shepard would be perfect for this if he was still alive.
Yeah.
I would also even throw out Redford, but he's retired now.
Yep. Damn. R.I.P.
I mean, R.I.P. for Robert Redford's career. Damn.
I mean, technically, you got to go out with the biggest film ever made. Am I right? Except tell everyone that you're going out with Old Man and the Gun, and then secretly show up in
Avengers Endgame. Yeah, I'm gonna say Jeff Bridges just for fun. You can say Tommy Lee Jones if you'd like. Ruth Popper.
Oh man, this is so tough. I should have done my homework.
I had one idea for Ruth Popper. Kristen Wiig.
Huh. Yeah.
I was thinking of a comedian type person who could possibly play that role, and for some reason, I think Kristen Wiig might be a good choice for that.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. I really like that.
I came prepped for these times.
Yeah. I do. I've got one. I know. Not for Ruth Popper, but I've got one locked away for when you bring it to me.
Okay. Lois Farrow.
Amy Adams.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually. Okay, I'll stick with that. I like the Amy Adams for that. Okay, Genevieve, the waitress.
Okay. I love Eileen Brennan in this. I love Eileen Brennan, period.
Yeah.
Between when I was a kid, Clue, The Sting, and the New Adventures of Pippi Longstocking. Those are three major films from my childhood.
She run the orphanage, is what it is.
Yeah, she kept trying to get Pippi to come to the orphanage with them.
I also really loved that movie.
Yeah, Genevieve's a tough one. I love Genevieve, and they that's another thing that they hit in the script. There's so much time spent in the movie about what a crush Sonny has on Genevieve. And they just have this one moment where he's like sitting eating a burger, and they show like a POV shot where he's like watching her while she cooks, and you get it. You get it. And you don't need all that internal dialogue. They just boom, they hit it. And so she's like a mother figure to them, but also like everyone's in love with her.
I'm gonna throw out one. What about Julianne Moore?
Yeah, I like that. She's good in that type of role.
I thought Patricia Clarkson is another one. I thought to go with the sharp
I got
objects.
a little bit younger than that. I mean, she's supposed to be,
what I was thinking too.
She's supposed to be the same age as Lois. They were friends growing up.
Maybe Julianne Moore. Maybe a little bit younger. What about Maggie Gyllenhaal?
Oh yeah, I think she'd be great.
I think Maggie Gyllenhaal would be interesting in that role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she's got to have that kind of like she's definitely got to be like more approachable than Lois. And just kind of like she's kind of a weariness to her, I think.
I like Maggie Gyllenhaal in that. Yeah, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Amy Adams, Kristen Wiig, Jeff Bridges, or Tommy Lee Jones.
One more Genevieve, Marissa Tomei.
I like Marissa Tomei too. That's not a bad one either.
And then Sam Shepard, and then we bring Sam Shepard.
Sam Shepard back to play Sam the Lion.
Yeah. What about Richard Gere?
You know what? I'm fine with that. I'm fine with Richard Gere in that role.
I just thought Sam Shepard, Days of Heaven, and then just Richard Gere came into my head.
I would like Richard Gere because he also plays Billy the Kid in the I'm Not There movie with the Todd Haynes did, the Bob Dylan thing. He plays like the older like cowboy, like he's playing Billy, like he's an old Billy the Kid. I like let's go Richard Gere, Sam the Lion, Richard Gere, Ruth Popper, Kristen Wiig, Lois Farrow as Amy Adams, Genevieve as Maggie Gyllenhaal or Marissa Tomei.
Let's make it.
And then Florence Pugh as JC.
Yeah.
Like I think we're good.
Perfect.
Who directs it? David Gordon Green? Is that the best one to go with?
Ooh, I do like that. Haven't we already done that? And haven't we already done him as one of our? Let's give it to Jeff Nichols.
Okay, I'll stick with Jeff Nichols. I like that. So who's Michael Shannon? That's the thing. Who do you put Michael Shannon as? Is he Abilene?
Oh yeah.
Michael Shannon is Abilene. Let's do that. I like that.
Oh yeah.
I like that. That's talk about some Oscars again there.
Shea Wiggum is the coach.
Oh man, you're making a great. We're making a great movie here, Thomas. Does this film fit with any other genre?
I mean, I think it's a coming of age. Yeah, I think it's a coming of age movie. For sure. It's definitely not the most hopeful coming of age film.
No, it's very bleak.
Yeah, and I think there is kind of this like weird, and maybe we could do this at some other time. There is like a small town genre.
Yeah, there is.
I agree. Where you get to know everyone in the town, and it's kind of like an ensemble piece. And I think this is probably the best one of them.
Yeah, I would love to do an episode if we could actually delve into the small town genre, because it's not as well defined, if that makes sense. And if you look up just like small town movies, it feels like they're kind of just like it's very everywhere. There's no like consistent list of anything.
Yeah, and I think it's a genre that's usually defined by like outsiders where you follow an outsider into a town, and it's rarely one where you're just in this town that everyone is in and no one is an outsider. I think it's very rare within that. But it's like there's too many movies like The Proposal where Sandra Bullock's coming to a small town in Alaska. Or Doc Hollywood is like the one.
Yeah,
where
it's the
like
big one.
Cars. Yeah. There's so many movies after that one. As I was told when I watched the movie Local Hero, like this was before Doc Hollywood, so even you could trace that all back to Local Hero, which is a fantastic movie. I love that movie.
Yeah. But then, but then something like some of the David Gordon Green films, like All the Real Girls or Snow Angels, these are kind of these movies that all focus on these characters that live within the town, and it takes place within the town. We'll work on that. We'll pick a month for small town movies and see what we can do with it. I mean, we'll just spend one day on Lifetime Christmas movies for one of those, because that's all it's about. Small towns. Yeah, so small town, coming of age. We're going to be talking about coming of age movies in the near future in one of our upcoming months. But yeah, so I think that's our. Anything else you want to say about The Last Picture Show?
Please watch it, y'all. It's incredible.
It's been one of my favorites that we've done in these kind of like single movie episodes, and I know it's one of Thomas's favorites. He told me to watch it for the first time, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and this is my first time revisiting it, and I loved it even more this time.
When we sat down to watch it, I told my girlfriend that the first time I had seen it was in my first film class when I was in high school, and we started watching it, and we were like 20-30 minutes into it, and she goes, "They showed this to you in high school?" I was like, well, I was in high school. I was taking a film class at the local tech college, so it was technically a college course, so the subject matter was
yeah,
okay.
there's a scene.
It was not shown to me in high school.
Like the scene when they're making out in the car, and she just like, this is a weird thing to bring up at the very end. It's like, it's the scene where it's like, she just takes off her bra, like, okay, let's get to doing this. Mm-hmm. Like, it's such a monotonous, like,
yeah. Oh, and that's so it's very early on, and it really establishes kind of the quirks of this town. As she's like, all right, we drive out, we park at the lake, I take my top off, and then he tries to put his hand up her skirt, and she says, "That's how you get pregnant." Like there's these like rules that everyone's agreed to in the town, and there's stuff that's outside of the norm, but like it's got this like these things that are like these rules that are established in this town, and I think that scene drops you in really well.
And he's trying to break the rules in that first scene with her, and then he breaks up with her. But that's kind of that sets the tone for the rest of the film, where everyone's kind of. I
mean, that is the moment where Sonny like breaks out of he's in the loop, and that's the moment that he breaks out of the loop.
Yeah. Like I want something more. Mm. But yeah, go watch it. It's on Criterion Channel or Crackle. They're streaming it apparently, so go watch it if you can. Make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode. We're going to be delving into Hell or High Water, the modern example of the Texas genre. So get ready for that. Make sure you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and listen to us on Spotify. Give us a rating, give us a review. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and follow our Medium, because we're putting out more articles, usually week by week right now, and some Texas-themed articles as well. Thomas, as always, thank you so much.
Absolutely, man.
Coming on and talk about one of your favorite films of all time. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We hope you listen to more episodes soon. Bye.